So, one of the fundamental principles of trade, which we in economics, is the principle of comparative advantage. Trade is mutually beneficial. This is kind of the gospel of professional economists who work on trade issues. And it's kind of surprising to me, that there is so much talk of X doing benefit. I don't want to use names because it always creates a counter. X doing benefit to Y and Y getting advantage of X. The whole concept is of mutual benefit. And unless the political people, the IR people like you, understand and start thinking in those ways, we are not going to move very far, because this is the wrong way to look at it. Now, there are certain circumstances in which political economy does come in, but this is kind of the fundamental truth from which we start. So, I'll apply this to bilateral and SAARC and so on, and give you a little bit of a direction. I have to say a little bit about the past to go into the future. But before I do that, the global experience. One of the most important factors, which is a dynamic, when we take this truth of comparative advantage, that's a static concept. It's the gains from trade one time. Not hearing? Sorry. But what modern growth theory tells us is that you get growth poles, which the neighborhood is both constrained by and benefits from each other. So if you have a growth pole, this has been shown by studies in Latin America and many other places, you have fast-growing economy, those in the neighborhood benefit from it. And vice versa. If you have a bad neighborhood, there's a cost to be paid by a faster-growing economy. Now, it turns out, of course, not all of you will may be aware, and I'm not saying this as something to crow about, but in the period 2003 to 2012, India was the 6th fastest growing economy in the world for this period. It turns out that there are others in South Asia which are growing. So Bhutan, if you look at this, Bhutan has been one of the fastest growing. And in the second tier, even Sri Lanka, despite its civil war, and Bangladesh, which we don't usually think of, kind of in the 10 to 20 have been growing pretty fast. Okay, they are not down there, 100 or something. They are up there. So there are big advantages, but you cannot use these advantages until you're interconnected. If you're totally isolated, like Myanmar, for example, was, you don't gain or lose from anybody else. But if you want to gain, you have to be connected. Obvious fact, right? You're going to be connected by communication, by infrastructure, etc. Ambassador just mentioned that in 1965 we were the closest traders. It turns out that the gravity model which Nisha did, in a way, confirmed it. What it showed was the biggest increase in trade from opening would come from India-Pakistan trade. So that kind of confirms what was actually the reality. And this was true even today. Today meaning 10 years ago when she did that study. That's a general point. Now let me go to the, I think of this process and going forward, I think it's important to do that. There's kind of a 3-level or 3-stage process. One is what I would call bilateral. The second is regional, the SAARC or the SAFTA approach. And the third is global. How do we fit into supply chains, etc. I mentioned. But there are a few other points which I will just bring. On the bilateral side, it seems to me the best way to cut through all the politics is to apply global rules. We have rules. We have WTO rules, we have GATS rules, we have anti-dumping things, we have all kinds of things. I have never understood why any country which is affected negatively can't use those. So I would suggest focus on those rules, implement them in letter and spirit. This is not a favor. It is not a favor India is doing to Pakistan. It's not a favor Pakistan is doing to us. These rules exist. They exist for mutual benefit. And we just have to do that to remove them from the politics. That's one point. Second, as I said, you can't have any gains unless you have the connectedness. And one simple way, again, to think about it is exactly the point you made, which is to say, okay, how were we connected in 1960? At least get that level of interconnectedness. It's no big leap you're making. It's something you had in 1960. The third point is about competitiveness. Again, as an economist, I'm kind of puzzled by this competitiveness issue for Pakistan, and the argument is very simple. China is our biggest competitive threat. We apply in our anti-dumping processes. China always comes on top. We are always, Indian companies are complaining about dumping by China, etc. There are all kinds of cases going on. Well, you've been open to China for decades. You don't seem to have a problem. So I can't understand why there would be a competitive threat from India when it doesn't exist from China. So please reflect on that. I mean, I honestly, as an economist, I don't understand. And the transaction cost was mentioned. That's very simple, but I just want to put it in economic terms. When there's a diversion, we call it a deadweight loss. It's like money lying on the ground, right? So if you open that, it's just going to come in the open and both sides will benefit. There's no question about it. But what I warned my Pakistani friends in Washington was, and I think the warning has been given here, what you see in the trade data is a big increase in, let's say, Pakistan's imports from India. There is no increase. It is just coming out into the open. But somebody has to be out there, because I'm sure there will be lots of people complaining and saying, oh, we told you this is going to ruin the economy. But it's not going to ruin, it's just going to be in the data. That's it, nothing else. Now, where I envisage actually, and that's in a way the perceptiveness of good politicians of Punjab, it was mentioned. It's what we call local or provincial comparative advantage. I think there are huge gains to be made there, except that most economic analysts don't really look at the local level. We always look at the national level. So I am very convinced that this opening on the provincial level is really where a lot of the local gains, that's where you build the political capital, but you're going to actually see gains. And it also ties into the supply chains. So my focus, if I was advising, would be on the Sindh, Rajasthan, on the West Punjab, East Punjab, and of course on the two sides of Kashmir. I think you can actually get a lot of economic and political gains there. And finally, on what we used to call non-tradables, a lot of these so-called non-tradables have become tradables. Like 20 years ago, if you ask me, and you look at the data on international trade in cement, for example, we used to treat that as a non-tradable. Now, some of the rules for this are not very clear. So, when I hear these complaints about restrictions, somebody was mentioning that a ship with Siddharth was out in the harbor for, I don't know, with Pakistani cement. I think it's very important to understand, and again, politically, I think it's much better to go to the rules which exist and say, here are the international rules, we both accept WTO, GATS, etc. Let's just apply the rules in both the letter and the spirit. Then it doesn't, in my view, it seems that's less of a chance of becoming a political issue. And finally, let me move quickly. I don't know how long I've taken. I don't want to be speaking too much. But on the SARC. So my formula for bilateral actually is the principle of mutual benefit, reciprocity, and applying international rules. Where you have asymmetric concessions, really, in my view, politically, it's much better to do it in the regional and SARC concept. And actually now there's an added reason for doing it. I just want to take a minute on that. If you look at, in India, the President's address, so-called Parliament, the first session of Parliament, is where the government lays out its new policy. And if you look at the Foreign Affairs section of the President's speech, which is the Modi government's policy, on top is SARC. Okay? And there are only 5 countries mentioned. US is down on number 4. Now, take that seriously. Really, the SARC is going to be the center of the foreign policy attention as of now, at least. I don't know for how long, whether it lasts 5 years or more. But that is the channel. And what you say, I didn't know what you're saying, how far is progress, but in a way you confirm that, because all these concessions, where they are asymmetric, it's much easier politically to do in a SARC context, rather than directly. Saying you do something special for me, I do something special, that always becomes a political issue, somewhere or the other. So it's better to focus on the SARC if you're thinking in terms of a kind of asymmetric movements. Very quickly, interconnectedness, direct trade. My ambition would be that any country in SARC can trade directly. You call it transit, call it whatever, but you will not get the big gains unless that becomes a matter of fact. You don't get integrated into supply chains if every time the guy has to think, oh, if I produce something on the border with Nepal, will I be able to export there, and so on. I export in one side, one Punjab, and the other, I can't even export over there. It's a big psychological barrier. So you have to have that as one objective. Again, there are international rules of trade and transit. You can pick them up from EU, you can pick them up by ASEAN. You know, when we try to do as if we are making these something new we are inventing for India and Pakistan, I think that's the wrong approach. It's again, every time you do that, it becomes a bilateral conflict issue. When you're taking it from the international rules, they are there, everybody applies them. What's so special? Why can't we do it? Infrastructure, connecting highways, railways, whatever was there in 1960, that's obvious. Trade facilitation, as Sanjay mentioned, it's kind of basic to the supply chains. Thirdly, SAFTA. I'm very glad to hear that many of these concessions are coming, but SAFTA has been kind of dead. I think it needs to be revived. I'm going very quickly. The reduction. One other point aside is that we know from two things from the Indo-Sri Lanka agreement. One is, for example, much of the it occurs as a substitution. For example, Tata trucks substituted for Japanese imports. That's another thing. Those who want to improve relations must remember. You may actually get a number of imports from India which are really substituting for Japanese or some other country's imports. It's not that your domestic industry is producing less. And the third and final one on this area is the economies of scale in some sense. That is, companies get, which are small in scale, get a chance to try out things which they are not able to compete externally. So, for example, Sri Lankan service industries set up tea cafes in Tamil Nadu, and that's a new concept which probably they had never thought of, which they experiment and then can go out and do more widely. Okay, because of the time, I'm going to leave out the global one, but really I think you also have to have a little imagination. And one of the imaginative things for Pakistan is to think of being a hub for, between West Asia, Central Asia and Southeast Asia. Though it may look a little airy-fairy now, I think it's important to start writing about it, thinking about it, to get the public a little excited about the possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much.